Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and I'm here today to share a super soft and simple love-themed card using some of Reverse Confetti's newest releases. I've already done a little bit of prep work. I have a top-folding card base that I've created with mist cardstock, and I've already die cut from Premier Polar White, the stitched note and frames die, and just used that large outer frame. I'm using Love and XOXO word duos dies, and I've die cut Love 3 times. I'm going to use that here in a little bit. I'm using one of the floral images from Hatbox Florals, and I'm going to stamp it tone on tone with mist dye ink. So the same exact color as my card base is the same color I'm going to be stamping my images in. It's going to give kind of a soft, almost a watermark effect, and I'm using that same image 2 times in a row, just spinning it around so it fills a larger space. I taped my note and frame die in place with a little bit of post-it tape. I could have adhered it directly down, but I wanted just kind of to use it for placement to start with. Now those 3 love words I die cut earlier, I'm really quickly gluing them all together. You could do this with just a single one, but I like gluing several together. It just gives a thicker, more dimensional word. It looks a little more like it was done out of chipboard, other than the fact that it's white, of course, but it just adds a little bit of depth to it without having to try and put foam adhesive behind and hide that down there. So at this point now, I was thinking about adhering this frame with foam adhesive, but I decided to adhere it directly onto my card base and keep this a little closer to a 1 layer. It's going to have some dimension from the word die and the sentiment I'm going to add, but it kept the outer just a little bit simpler. I'm adhering that love word at an angle right between those florals, and you can see how that kind of hides the empty space between them, which is exactly what I wanted to do. So the florals just softly peek out the top and the bottom. Now I'm going to add a sentiment, a little additional sentiment, using the new Word Up stamp set. It's an awesome sentiment set with lots of nice tiny sentiments that are great for building and adding on and putting your sentiments on thin strips. One of my favorite things to do with sentiments. So I stamped it with watermark ink, and I'm heat embossing it with white embossing powder on Midnight cardstock. As always, I keep scraps of that on hand because I find myself often embossing sentiments on black cardstock. So this is kind of an easy way for me to keep it on hand. And I'm going to use my paper trimmer just to trim it down into a nice tiny thin strip, just wide enough to only fit the sentiment on there. And I'm going to trim that down really quick with my scissors, just at an angle on each side, and see how perfectly that's going to fit underneath that love word. Now I have some pre-done thin strips of foam adhesive. You could also just trim some foam adhesive down with your scissors if you only have a bigger roll. But I thought I'd use my ones that were already prepared in a thin strip. Now as a final finishing touch, I decided I wanted to add a few sequins kind of around there. I always end up fiddling with my sequins for quite a while before I finally settle on a placement. I kind of sped up my process here, but I moved them around, I adjusted until I was happy with how they were placed. And as you can see, it tends to be quite a bit of a process trying to get that exactly where I want it. I haven't learned a perfect technique for placing sequins. Sometimes it's really easy and they just go right where I want and I'm happy with it. And sometimes it, for example, on this card, it just took a little more fiddling. I think it was because my sentiments were kind of at an angle that it made it a little more effort to get it to where I was happy with it. Now you can use a jewel picker or just your fingers to hold it up. I really like this crystal katana. It works really well for picking those sequins up and putting them in place. I use Ranger Multi-Matte adhesive. It's a nice matte finish and it has a fine tip applicator. And there you go. That card's finished, nice and soft and simple, and you could do with any color combination that you wanted. Thanks so much for coming by today. Have a wonderful day.